Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a book that really got me thinking about how I communicate, how I connect with people.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. What's the book?
It's Larry King's How to Talk to Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere.
Oh, wow. Larry King, the master of conversation. I'm sure he's got some fascinating insights.
Absolutely. And the thing is, you might think, oh, I'm a pretty good talker already. But honestly, when you read this book, you realize there's always room for improvement.
I bet. Especially coming from someone like Larry King, who's interviewed everyone under the sun.
Yeah. He's interviewed presidents, celebrities, authors, you name it. So he's definitely picked up a few things along the way.
Right. Decades of experience. There must be some real gems in there.
Yeah. And you know what struck me? King's own journey is kind of surprising.
Oh, tell me more.
He actually froze up during his very first radio broadcast back in 1957.
Oh, wow. Like completely froze.
Talk about stage fright, right?
Hmm.
He was so nervous, the station manager had to come up with a new name for him, like right there on the spot.
No way. So that's where Larry King comes from.
Yep, he was born Larry Zeiger.
Yeah.
But because of that mic fright experience, Larry King was born.
That's wild. But, I guess it makes sense even someone like Larry King had to start somewhere.
Exactly. And he talks about how that experience, as mortifying as it must have been, pushed him to get better.
It could have been totally paralyzing.
Right. But instead, it motivated him. He took public speaking classes, practiced at home, took any opportunity he could get.
So it's a good reminder that even the best communicators, even the smoothest talkers had to work at it.
Totally. And that even the most awkward beginnings can be turned into something positive.
I love that. So getting into the book itself, where does King suggest we begin if we want to, up our conversation game?
He lays out a few fundamental principles that might seem simple at first, but they're really at the core of any meaningful connection.
Okay, like what?
Honesty, having the right attitude, genuine interest in others, and being open about yourself.
You know what? When you list those out, I realize those are the qualities I admire in the people I love talking to.
Me too. Like, think about the people you really enjoy having a conversation with.
Hmm.
They're usually the ones who are genuine, positive, and make you feel like they're actually interested in what you have to say.
And it makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Like you're being listened to and you matter.
Exactly. King points out that those qualities make you magnetic. People are drawn to that kind of energy.
Makes sense. But what about people who are, shy, who freeze up when they have to talk to someone new? Any tips from the King?
Oh, he's got a great story about that. It involves a decorated World War II fighter pilot.
A fighter pilot. Wow. What's the story?
So this pilot had flown all these dangerous missions.
Bravest of the brave.
You'd think he'd be fearless, right? But he was actually super nervous about being on the radio for an interview.
Aw, poor guy. So how did King handle that?
He did something so simple, yet brilliant. He just asked him straight up, "Are you nervous?"
Wait, really? Just like that?
Yep. And you know what? Acknowledging the nervousness actually put the pilot at ease.
Oh, I see. Like it created a connection.
Exactly. The
That-
tension just dissipated, and the pilot ended up sharing all these incredible stories.
So the lesson there is to just name the elephant in the room. That nervousness we all feel sometimes.
Right. It breaks the ice. Because, let's be honest, we all get nervous in certain situations.
Well, yeah, for sure. It makes you realize you're not alone in feeling that way.
Okay, so let's say you've broken the ice, you're chatting with someone new. What are some good ways to keep that conversation flowing, especially with strangers?
I struggle with that too. Like, what do you say next?
Well, King recommends paying attention to your surroundings. There are always those little points of connection you can find.
Like what?
It could be something as simple as commenting on the weather or the venue.
Oh, right. Like if you're at an event. This is a cool space, isn't it? Something like that.
Exactly. Or if the weather's crazy, that's an easy one. It's not about being super witty or anything, just finding that little spark of commonality.
Yeah. Okay, so be observant. Find those little things you can both relate to.
Yeah. And it all ties back to what King calls his first rule of conversation, which is to truly listen.
Listening, that's so important. But what does that really mean in practice?
He gives this fascinating example from his interview with Dan Quayle,
Dan Quayle, the former vice president.
the one and only. So King wasn't just passively listening to Quayle's answers. He was really absorbing his words, his tone, even his body language.
I see, like active listening.
Exactly. And through that deep listening, he noticed a subtle shift in Quayle's stance on abortion, which ended up being a major news story.
Wow. So active listening can actually lead to uncovering important information.
It shows the power of not just waiting for your turn to speak, but really tuning in to what the other person is saying.
It's hard sometimes, though, right, to really focus and not get distracted.
Oh, yeah. King tells this story about the author Jim Bishop, who had this interesting way of testing people's listening skills.
Oh, tell me.
He'd tell this long, rambling story with all these irrelevant details.
Oh, boy.
And then suddenly, he'd ask, what color was the house?
Mm.
Most people couldn't remember because they weren't truly engaged.
Makes you think, right? How often are we just waiting for our turn to talk instead of really listening?
All the time. It's something we have to be mindful of because when you're a good listener, you make people feel valued, and that strengthens the connection.
So true.
King also shares some insights on navigating conversations at small dinners, which, can have their own dynamics.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You've got different personalities, maybe some quiet people, some who dominate the conversation.
Right. He talks about the art of what he calls quarterbacking the conversation. You're guiding the flow without dominating it.
Okay, interesting. So how do you do that?
He recommends starting with open-ended questions, like what-if questions, to get everyone engaged.
Oh, that's good. It gets people thinking.
And he makes a point of bringing in the quieter folks, soliciting their opinions, making everyone feel included.
So important, because sometimes the quiet ones have the most interesting things to say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he emphasizes avoiding what he calls the third degree.
The third degree.
Yeah, when you just pepper someone with questions and make them feel like they're under interrogation.
Ooh, yeah. Nobody likes that.
Right. It's about respect, respecting people's boundaries, and creating that comfortable environment where everyone feels safe to contribute.
Now, one thing that's definitely changed since King started out is what we're willing to talk about openly. He talks about the decline of taboos.
True. Topics that were once off limits are now part of everyday conversations.
Like sex, religion, politics.
Yeah. He attributes this shift to things like cable TV and the internet. People are exposed to more diverse viewpoints now.
But it can be tricky too, right? Knowing when it's appropriate to bring up those potentially sensitive topics.
Exactly. King stresses that relevance is key.
Relevance.
Like, is it genuinely relevant to the conversation? Or are you just bringing it up to be provocative?
Right. You don't want to hijack the conversation or make people uncomfortable.
And speaking of shifting social dynamics, he also talks about how the way men and women communicate has evolved.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other dynamic.
He advocates for being honest and direct, but always respectful, and finding those common interests that can bridge any potential gaps.
Makes sense. It's about connecting on a human level.
And you know what King considers one of the most powerful tools in any conversation?
I'm dying to know.
The word why.
Why? It seems so basic.
It is, but it's amazing how it can completely change the direction of a conversation.
In what way?
When you ask why, it moves you beyond superficial small talk.
I see.
It makes people think more deeply about their reasoning, their motivations, their beliefs.
So you're not just accepting their statement at face value, you're digging deeper.
Right. And it's something we can all do more of. Sprinkle in a few more whys into our conversations.
Challenge ourselves to go a little deeper.
Exactly. And, it makes sense that King, with his insatiable curiosity, would be a fan of asking why.
He always wants to understand the story behind the story.
Okay, so we've talked about the fundamentals, how to jump to the ice, navigate tricky topics.
It's a lot to think about.
But now I want to get into what makes certain people such captivating conversationalists. What are those qualities that make some people just shine in a conversation?
Oh, I'm all ears. This is what I came for.
Well, King has identified 8 common traits that he's observed in some of the most successful talkers he's encountered.
Lay it on me.
They have a fresh perspective, broad horizons, enthusiasm. They avoid being self-centered.
Okay, I'm taking notes.
They're curious, empathetic, they have a good sense of humor, and a personal style.
Wow, that's quite a list.
King tells a story about having dinner with Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra. Old Blue Eyes himself. Okay, this I gotta hear.
You'd think Sinatra would be the one dominating the conversation, right? But he surprised everyone by dissecting a familiar song lyric in this totally new, insightful way.
Really? So even someone as iconic as Sinatra could bring a fresh perspective.
It shows that even with things we think we know well, there's always something new to discover.
And those little insights are what make a conversation memorable.
So it's not just about being witty or charming. It's about engaging your mind, being observant, and finding those unexpected connections.
I love that. And I think those qualities can be developed. We can all work on becoming better conversationalists.
Absolutely. It's not like you're born a great talker. It's a skill you can hone.
All right, so we've explored the basics, tackled shyness, even learned how to talk to celebrities.
What other wisdom does the king have to offer?
Well, he also delves into the world of business talk, offering some very practical advice.
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting for me. How can we apply King's principles in the workplace?
He stresses the importance of being concise, prepared, and most importantly, understanding the other person's needs.
Makes sense. Time is precious, especially in the business world.
He actually shares this story about his first job selling encyclopedias. He struggled at first because he was so focused on his sales pitch.
Oh, I bet we've all been there, talking at people instead of with them.
Right. And once he shifted his focus to really listening to what people were looking for, his sales took off.
It's about building rapport, even in a sales context.
Absolutely. And that applies to every aspect of business communication, whether you're dealing with clients, colleagues, or even your boss.
He even gives advice on how to navigate those conversations with your boss, which can be nerve-wracking.
Oh, I'd love to hear his take on that. It can be so tricky, especially if you're asking for something or need to address a sensitive issue.
He suggests framing your requests in a way that highlights the benefits to the company or to your boss's goals.
So it's not just about what you want, it's about how it aligns with the bigger picture.
Exactly. And be mindful of your boss's time and position. Don't bombard them with unnecessary information. Be respectful.
It's a delicate balance, being assertive but also respecting the hierarchy.
And just as important, he emphasizes clear communication and constructive feedback when you're talking to your subordinates.
Right, it's a two-way street.
Leadership is about more than just giving orders. It's about creating a positive environment where everyone feels valued.
It's about building trust and that sense of shared purpose.
And, one of the more surprising pieces of advice King offers, it's about dealing with assistants.
Oh, assistants. That can be a whole minefield.
I know, right? Sometimes it feels like they're gatekeepers, deliberately making things difficult.
Trying to shield their boss from the outside world.
But King has a totally different perspective. He says assistants are incredibly valuable allies.
Oh, really?
Treat them with respect, and they can make your life a lot easier.
I never thought of it that way. So how do you win them over?
He suggests simply asking them for their advice.
Advice.
Yeah, like, what's the best way to reach so-and-so?
Oh, I get it. You're acknowledging their expertise.
And it's just the dynamic. It's not adversarial anymore.
It's collaborative. You're on the same team.
And it can save you a lot of time and frustration down the road.
It's like having an inside track.
And King goes even further, saying a good assistant can make or break your career.
Wow, I never realized how important that relationship could be.
It's a reminder to treat everyone with respect, no matter their position.
And speaking of respecting different perspectives, we were talking about negotiation earlier. King highlights two distinct styles.
Oh, yeah. I'm really curious to hear more about these approaches, because negotiating effectively can be so valuable in business and in life.
Absolutely. The first one comes from his friend, Herb Cohen.
Herb Cohen.
Yeah, he's the author of that best-selling book, You Can Negotiate Anything.
Oh, I've heard of that.
So Cohen's approach is all about projecting an air of success, even if you're not in the strongest position.
Okay, so even if you're feeling a little insecure.
Right. Dress well, speak confidently, maintain a positive attitude, create this aura of authority.
It's almost psychological, right? You're influencing the other person's perception of you.
Exactly. But Cohen's not advocating for being dishonest. It's about presenting yourself in the best possible light.
It's like that saying, dress for the job you want, not the job you have.
Exactly. But King also presents this contrasting approach. He learned it from his longtime agent, Bob Wolf.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What's Wolf's philosophy?
Wolf's all about respect, honesty, and avoiding hostility.
That's more in line with King's overall approach, building genuine connections.
Right. Wolf believed that the best negotiations happen when both sides feel heard and respected.
So it's not about winning at all costs, it's more collaborative.
Exactly. Wolf was known for his integrity and for maintaining positive relationships, even with people he was negotiating with.
It's a reminder that negotiation doesn't have to be this cutthroat battle. It can be a process where everyone benefits.
And, both approaches have their merits. It really depends on the situation and the personalities involved.
Okay, so switching gears now to something a little more delicate. I'm curious about King's advice on dealing with those tough situations like wakes and funerals.
Oh, yeah, those can be so hard to navigate. You don't want to say the wrong thing.
King stresses the importance of being sincere. avoiding those trite condolences that can feel so empty.
Yeah, like they're in a better place now.
Right. Instead, he suggests speaking from the heart, sharing a brief anecdote about the deceased if it feels appropriate, or just offering a listening ear.
It's about being present and supportive, focusing on the other person's grief.
And he even finds a way to incorporate humor, which might seem surprising.
Humor at a funeral.
He talks about speaking at his agent's funeral and choosing to celebrate his friend's life with laughter.
That's so touching. It's about remembering the good times, the joy that person brought into the world.
And speaking of moments that don't always go as planned, King ends his book with a chapter on bloopers.
Bloopers. Oh, I love bloopers. Everyone makes mistakes, even Larry King.
Right. He tells this one story about falling asleep on air.
Wait, what? He fell asleep on air.
He dozed off for a minute, and it caused a total panic at the station. Listeners thought something was terribly wrong.
Oh my gosh, so embarrassing.
And then there's the time he misidentified the Baltimore Colts football team as a marching band.
You're kidding. How do you even mix that up?
It's amazing. But he tells these stories with such self-deprecating humor that you can't help but laugh along with him.
It's so refreshing to see someone who doesn't take themselves too seriously.
And, his approach to those blunders is really insightful.
What's his secret?
He says you got to roll with the punches. Don't let a mistake derail you. Keep the show going.
So don't dwell on it.
Exactly. Acknowledge it, learn from it, and move on. Focus on delivering the best experience for your audience.
That's a great reminder for all of us in any field.
It's not about being perfect. It's about being human, being able to laugh at yourself, and having that resilience to keep going.
And I think that's a perfect way to sum up King's approach to communication overall.
It's not about being flawless. It's about being authentic, being present, and willing to embrace those inevitable imperfections that make us who we are.
And I'm thinking about those 8 qualities he identified in Great Conversationalists.
Those were so insightful. Do you have a favorite?
I think for me, the one that stands out is empathy.
Oh, empathy. Being able to understand and share the feelings of others.
Yeah, it's so crucial, especially in today's world. When we can put ourselves in someone else's shoes, it opens up a whole new level of understanding and connection.
And it makes the conversation more meaningful, more than just an exchange of words.
Right. And I think it's a quality we can all cultivate. We can all work on being more empathetic in our interactions.
So as we continue this deep dive, let's keep that in mind. Let's challenge ourselves to not just listen, but to truly understand, to see the world through the eyes of others. Who knows what amazing insights and connections await us?
I'm excited to find out. It really does make you realize that we all have those awkward moments. Nobody's perfect.
Exactly. And King's point is that even with celebrities, we should remember they're just people too. They have their own insecurities, their own struggles.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the whole fame and fortune thing and forget they're human beings just like us.
He tells this funny story about a small-town mayor who was supposed to introduce the actor Walter Pidgeon at a war bond rally.
Walter Pidgeon, the old Hollywood star?
The one and only. So this mayor was super nervous.
I bet. Introducing a big-time celebrity.
And you know what he did? He accidentally introduced him as Mr. Privilege.
Mr. Privilege instead of Mr. Pigeon.
Oh, no. I can only imagine the cringeworthy silence that followed.
Poor mayor.
Right.
But we've all had those slip-of-the-tongue moments.
Exactly. It's a reminder to be kind and understanding because we've all been there.
And to treat celebrities like, regular people.
Right. So the next time you find yourself chatting with a famous person, skip the cheesy fan stuff and try to connect with them on a human level.
That makes sense. Ask about their interests, their passions, not just their latest project.
Exactly. Treat them like you would anyone else you want to have a genuine conversation with.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, I'm really interested in what King has to say about business talk.
Yeah.
How to make those conversations more effective and less, awkward.
He emphasizes 3 key things: being concise, being prepared, and understanding the other person's needs.
I can see how those are crucial in a business setting. Nobody wants to waste time.
He actually shares this anecdote about his first job selling encyclopedias. He was struggling to make sales at first because he was too focused on delivering his polished pitch.
I bet he was trying to sound all slick and professional.
Right. And he realized he wasn't really listening to what people were actually looking for.
He was talking at them, not with them.
Exactly. And once he shifted his focus to understanding their needs, his sales started to take off.
It's about building that rapport, even in a sales context.
Totally. And he applies that same principle to all business communication, whether you're dealing with clients, colleagues, even your boss.
Speaking of bosses, I'm curious about what he has to say about navigating those sometimes tricky conversations with your supervisor.
He gives some great advice. He says, when you're making a request, frame it in a way that highlights the benefits to the company.
Oh, I see. So instead of just saying, hey, I need a raise, you'd say something like, if I had more resources, I could boost sales by X%.
Exactly. Show that you're thinking about the bigger picture.
Makes you sound more strategic, less self-serving.
Right. And be mindful of your boss's time. Don't interrupt them constantly. Be respectful of their position.
Okay, so be assertive, but also know your place.
And just as importantly, when you're talking to your subordinates, he stresses clear communication, active listening, and constructive feedback.
Leadership isn't just about giving orders. It's about creating that positive environment where people feel supported.
He talks about the importance of regular performance evaluations, but not as a way to criticize, more like a chance for open dialogue and goal setting.
It's about building trust and a shared sense of purpose.
You know, one of the things that surprised me was his advice on dealing with assistants.
Oh, assistants? I've had my fair share of frustrating encounters.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's like they're guarding the castle gates, making it impossible to reach the person you need.
Oh.
But King says, treat assistants with respect, and they can be your biggest allies.
Really? How so?
He suggests starting by asking for their advice.
Advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what's the best way to reach so-and-so, or when's a good time to call?
So you're acknowledging their role, not trying to go over their head.
And it shifts the dynamic. They're not the enemy anymore. They're on your team.
And they might have insights you wouldn't get otherwise.
Exactly. He even says a good assistant can make or break your career.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. It really underscores the importance of treating everyone with respect.
Okay, so we were talking earlier about negotiation. King highlights those two different approaches.
Oh, yeah, those were interesting. I'd love to hear more about each style and when to use them.
The first one, from Herb Cohen, is all about projecting confidence, even if you don't feel it.
So it's kind of like a power move.
In a way.
Yeah.
Dress sharp, speak assertively, create that aura of authority.
It's about influencing the other person's perception of you.
Exactly. But Cohen's not saying you should be dishonest. It's about presenting yourself in the best possible light.
Right. And it makes sense, especially if you're going into a negotiation where you don't have a lot of leverage.
But King also presents that contrasting approach, the one he learned from his agent, Bob Wolf.
Okay, what was Wolf's style?
Wolf was all about respect, honesty, and avoiding hostility.
It's more about building trust and finding common ground.
Exactly. Wolf believed the best negotiations are where both sides feel heard and respected.
And where you work together to find a solution that benefits everyone.
Exactly. He was known for his integrity and for maintaining those positive relationships, even with people he was negotiating with.
It's a great reminder that negotiation doesn't have to be this cutthroat thing. It can be collaborative.
And both approaches have their time and place.
I guess the key is to be aware of the different styles and choose the one that's most appropriate for the situation.
Okay, so shifting gears now to something a little more sensitive. What about those difficult conversations we have to have sometimes, like at a wake or a funeral?
Oh, those can be so tough. You don't want to say the wrong thing and make things worse.
King emphasizes sincerity above all else.
So no cliches or platitudes?
Right. Avoid those empty phrases that don't really mean anything. Instead, speak from the heart. Maybe share a brief anecdote about the deceased if it feels appropriate.
Or just listen. Sometimes that's all you can do.
Exactly. It's about being present and offering support. And, even in those somber settings, King finds a way to bring in humor.
Humor? At a funeral? That seems risky.
He tells this story about speaking at his agent's funeral and how he chose to celebrate his friend's life with laughter.
Aw, that's so sweet, remembering the joy that person brought into the world.
And speaking of moments that don't always go as planned, King wraps up his book with a chapter dedicated to bloopers.
Bloopers. Oh, I love it. It's so reassuring to know that even someone like Larry King has those moments where things go wrong.
He tells one story about actually falling asleep on air. Can you imagine?
Falling asleep? On live radio, how is that even possible?
He dozed off for a minute, and it caused a total panic at the station because listeners thought something was wrong.
Oh, no. I bet his heart was racing when he woke up.
And then there's the time he misidentified the Baltimore Colts football team as a marching band.
No way. How do you even mix those up?
It's incredible. But you know what's so great? He tells these stories with such self-deprecating humor that you can't help but laugh along with him.
It's endearing, right? It makes him seem more human, more relatable.
Exactly. And, his approach to dealing with those blunders is so insightful.
What's his secret?
He says you got to roll with the punches, acknowledge the mistake, learn from it, and move on. Focus on delivering the best experience for your audience.
So don't beat yourself up about it.
Right. Keep the show going. It's not about being perfect. It's about being resilient and being able to laugh at yourself.
That's a great reminder for all of us. We all make mistakes, and sometimes the best thing to do is just acknowledge them and move on.
And I think that's a perfect encapsulation of King's overall approach to communication. It's not about being flawless. It's about being genuine, being present, and embracing those imperfections that make us human.
And it makes you realize that, hey, if Larry King can mess up sometimes, it's okay if I do too.
Totally. It takes the pressure off.
Right? It does. It's like, it's not about being perfect. It's about being real.
He tells this story, I think it was in an interview, where he actually introduced a guest on his show as a Nobel Prize-losing author.
Oh. Oh my gosh, that's so awkward.
I know. Can you imagine being that guest?
Oof. I'd want to crawl under a table.
But King, instead of freaking out, he just owned it, made a joke about it, and moved on.
That takes guts.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And the audience loved it. They appreciated his honesty and his ability to laugh at himself.
It's like that saying, never let them see you sweat. But in this case, it's more like, let them see you sweat, make a joke about it, and keep going.
Exactly. I think that's such a valuable lesson, not just for broadcasters, but for all of us.
Yeah. We all make mistakes. It's how we handle them that matters.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Larry King's book, I'm curious what you're taking away from it. What's resonating with you the most?
You know, I keep coming back to this one big theme that runs throughout the book.
I'm listening. What is it?
Connection. That's what it's all about. Recognizing that we're all human beings with stories to share.
It's about putting aside our egos and anxieties and really engaging with each other.
And just being present, listening with intent, asking good questions, finding those things that connect us.
And King's own life is a testament to that power of connection. He interviewed so many different people over the years, from presidents to everyday folks.
And he always found a way to connect with them on a human level. It's pretty amazing.
So it's not just about mastering techniques or having all the right answers. It's about cultivating that curiosity about the world and the people in it.
It is. It's about remembering that every conversation is an opportunity to learn something new, to broaden our horizons, to connect with someone who might change our perspective.
Beautifully said. So as we sign off, let's all challenge ourselves to embrace the art of conversation.
Let's listen with curiosity, speak with authenticity, and see what incredible connections we can make.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.